Welcome to Science of Slength, the evidence-based poll podcast with me, your host, Dr. Rosie Boa. And just to be very clear, I'm not a medical doctor. I cannot treat or diagnose. I'm the type of doctor that does research and reads research articles. And that's part of what we're going to be doing together here in the podcast. We're going to be reading research. We're going to be synthesizing that down into things that you can apply to your poll practice. We're going to be talking with experts in their field and learning more. And overall, just really building our understanding of how bodies work, how we can do poll better, train more effectively, train more safely, and just have a better time overall. So if that sounds like something you're interested in and you want to come get a little bit nerdy with us, come on in. Hello and welcome to an episode. I guess I usually say it's an exciting episode. I think this is going to be an interesting episode. I don't know about exciting, but I recently had someone ask a little bit about me and my background and where I'm coming from when I'm doing things, and I thought it would be a good chance to talk a little bit about that, but also about a lot of the things that I keep in mind when I'm designing programming for my studio, and really specifically for my members, because the difference between my members and people who are in drop-in classes is that I know my members get all my classes, so I want to make sure that they all work together and are part of a cohesive whole, and that I'm really drawing on, evidence-based principles as I'm doing that. So let's just hop right in. A little bit about me. This is, I guess, maybe my third career technically. I don't know. The first two are really related. But I have a research PhD in a field that is small enough that it's, you'll be shocked to hear that Rosie Boa is not my given name. And the top of my PhD is narrow enough that, it would conflate the two parts of my life to share it, but broadly it's in a computational social science that also incorporates some physiology and anatomy. I think that's fair. And I'm also an action certified personal trainer. I don't know that I'd recommend action to other people, but I will say this, it's the cheapest one, and it's what I could afford when I was getting my personal training certification. So there you have it. And also, they cover their bases. When I started teaching pole in 2018-ish, in there, I was part of a 6-month training apprenticeship program. So I've been, specifically trained to teach pole. And I also did a certification for that for something that is now defunct, so doesn't matter anymore. But beyond that, I've done a lot of continuing education. Honestly, a lot of it on the podcast. That's part of the reason I started it, was so I could keep up with the research and what people are doing and talking about. I've taken, a lot of specific aerial training workshops. So I took a couple with Emily Scherb in Seattle, the circus doc. She was on the podcast, lovely. Very knowledgeable and supportive of bringing evidence-based practice to circus arts, which pole arguably kind of is one of a little bit. The physical demands are very similar, so a lot of it applies. And of course, I do a lot of reading and research on my own, and I've been pole dancing for a long fucking time. So I've been pole dancing for 12, almost 13 years at this point. And when I came into it, I had no physical activity in my life whatsoever. And I was really starting from zero, and I learned a lot. And I've had, my body's undergone pretty big changes while I was doing pole. So I have done pole with a body that was, fairly different over time. So I have a lot of embodied personal experience, street smarts. And that's a lot of what I bring into my teaching, in addition to, again, just sort of being a nerd and believing in, bringing in evidence from a lot of different areas and seeing where they agree. And, one of those areas is also my students' experiences. So I should say, I've had quite a bit of experience teaching at this point. Now I got to do math live. 2018 to 2024 is 6 years. Is that right? That sounds about right. So about half the time I've been polling, actually, at this point. And I should say, very glad that I waited until I had been polling for a while before I started teaching, because it really, having that deep, even if you're doing poll 3 or 4 times a week, there is so much there. There's so much that goes into this movement and different movements at different levels. And there's so much to explore and know and understand, both intellectually, but also physically in your body, that I do think you need either a very large body of experience and information about sort of exercise science generally, in addition to your pole experience or a lot of pole experience, one of the two. Anyway, little aside. So when I'm putting stuff together, those are sort of the threads that I'm pulling on, right? Sort of the personal training, strength and conditioning thread, having done a lot of pole, and then also, you know, I'm trained as a scientist and I can't turn that off. I've tried, it doesn't work. So that's a lot of what I'm pulling together in my own practice for me, what I'm doing, and then also as well when I'm designing things for my students. So all of that comes together in what I do. And I think I was going to talk next a little bit more about sort of my movement background and a lot of the disciplines that I sort of, you know, pull from when I'm doing my programming. But I think actually I'm going to first talk about organization, because I think these are broad principles that would be helpful to anyone who's training pole at home. And of course, you know, anyone can apply these, right? The benefit of having a teacher do it for you is that you don't have to do it yourself. And it does work, right? It's a big part of the work is designing the programming. So I organize my classes in a number of ways. You know, within the class, there's organization. Over the course of a week, there's organization. Over the course of a month, there's an organization. And then over the year, there's an organization. So I'm really thinking about structuring training and periodization and, you know, increasing and decreasing difficulty over time to give you time to rest and recover, as well as time to push yourself and, you know, really work into your strength and flexibility. And of course, pole skills as well, right? Motor learning is part of the things that I'm thinking about. Motor learning is one of the things that I'm thinking about as I am developing my curriculum, because it's not, even if you walk into a pole class extremely strong and flexible, you're not going to immediately pick things up. And if you do, you're probably not going to pick them up in a very efficient movement manner. It's going to take time to refine and understand what's going on with pole as an apparatus. And that motor learning, I firmly believe, should probably happen separately to the strength and conditioning portion, because when we were doing things on pole, there's just a greater element of risk. There's more going on. There's more sort of cognitive demand. So that's my preference, and that's how I organize my classes. So within a class, we always start with a warm-up, and the warm-up is honestly partially mental, because we are, in all of my classes, I do include some freestyle and some degree of dance. I mean, obviously we spend less of a strength and conditioning class doing freestyle dance than we do in a freestyle dance class, but it is something that is there, so really helping you find that mental state of being able to improvise movement, always part of it. Mental component of the warm-up. We also do joint mobilizations, works for all the major joints of the body, with a greater focus on the ones that we're going to be working with that day, which I know in advance because I plan my course curriculum around it. And then a little bit of cardio as well, to get your heart rate up. That's also a very important part of warm-up. And then if we're working on something specific, I will add that as a specific part of the warm-up as well. So for example, we're going to be doing some handstandy sort of stuff over the next couple weeks. So I included a handstandy sort of conditioning warm-up drill in class on Monday, and I'm going to do it again on this Monday. So that's within a class. And then at the end, obviously, there's a little bit of a cool down. And when we are working on both strength and endurance in a class, I always do, you know, strength first, endurance second. That's just sort of for the type of thing that we are doing in pole, that's a general best practice. So each of my classes is structured in this way, and of course different classes are a little bit different, but that's a general idea. And then within a week, I have Monday is my pole day, and that's when we're working on skills, and that's where I expect the most sort of motor learning to happen. Which is why I put it first, because our last class is on Thursday, so you've had a nice long break. You're fresh physically, you're fresh mentally. You've had time since the last Monday for anything that we were working on, because we do revisit things and we work in themes to sort of percolate, and then we work on skills. I don't know, is where I'm going with that. And then Wednesday is our freestyle class, and this is a chance for you to revisit skills if you would like, not necessary, of course, and also more of a cardio endurance focused class because we are moving pretty much the whole time. So there'll be a little bit more strength demand on Monday, Wednesday, a little bit more endurance demand Thursday, that's our conditioning, so that's when we're doing strength and flexibility work, and of course that's the biggest demand, and then we have a nice long 3-day break before we get back on the pole. And of course everybody gets recordings, you can do them at any time, but I have done the split like this because I think it makes a lot of sense, drawing on principles of exercise science. And also I have to do all the classes. That's sort of how it works. So I want to make sure that I'm giving myself the best possible chance for success as an instructor and mover, and doing my own training around it, which we can talk about if you're interested. And then within a month, right, so that's within a week, I'm doing periodization and varying intensity very intentionally over the month. So at the beginning of the month, we start with the lowest intensity movements, we'll ramp up, and then the last week of the month is our deload week. So either 3 or 4 weeks, depending, of increasing intensity, increasing complexity of skill work, increasing physical demand, the conditioning gets harder, everything sort of goes up and then it comes down. You have a week where we do much less taxing work, so we review things in our pole class, so you have a little bit of a mental break. Freestyle, I'm not giving you big artistic challenges, and then in our conditioning, everything is just like taken way down. We do some mindfulness, we do, it's a recovery workout basically in our last week, and then starting the next month, we start ramping up again. So there's like a curve pattern of intensity that, again, just based on principles of exercise science, and something that I really recommend that everyone does. And if you're just training yourself at home, design something for yourself so that happens. You definitely don't want to be going at, consistent intensity the whole time, especially if that's very high intensity. And what you really don't want to be doing is just trying to go up forever. Infinite growth is a lie, and acting as if it is the truth will lead to your body having a bad time, both in exercise and perhaps other areas of life as well. So that's the sort of general pattern that I'm working with. And you can definitely do longer periodization schedules, right? 6 weeks is pretty common, 2 months is pretty common, but it's a monthly membership. And so that way I know that people are, when they join, they're going to get this whole cycle once. This is also why I generally only open my membership doors at the beginning of the month, so you can join during the build-up rather than coming in at like week 4 or week 3 when we're doing things that we've been preparing our bodies for all month, but you probably haven't been, and you're coming in and you're like, what's going on? And of course, I do drop-in classes. All of my classes are also available as drop-in classes, so anyone can come in at any time. But, if I know that you're going to be taking all the classes, I would prefer that you start at the beginning of our cycle rather than the end, so that you have, you can join us in adapting physiologically to the stressors that we're going to be putting on our bodies. So, also the conditioning classes, I generally do sort of like a 2-week split, roughly upper body, lower body. Sometimes we'll have a core focus class, depending on what we're working on in pole, because it all works together, right? Like the conditioning that we're doing on any given week is going to directly feed into the pole that we're doing the next week, or is going to build on the pole that we did the previous week. And then all the pole classes are related to each other. We're working on some of the same like major biomechanical principles. I'm trying to like link things in a way that it's not we're doing the exact same thing for a month, because I think that even with periodization, that does have the potential for overtraining, depending on sort of your current physical fitness level. If you've been doing pole for a while, it's probably fine. If you're newer to pole, I wouldn't recommend it, which is why I don't do it. Yes, but so what we're doing on the conditioning is ties into everything else, and also I'm rotating it through, so over the course of a month, you should get pretty much everything that's relevant to what we're doing on the pole. And then over the course of a year, each month we have a different focus, and those focuses rotate. If you're familiar with my pyramid of pole idea, where we've got capacity at the bottom, which is your physical capacity to do things, middle is ability, so your technical ability, and then the top is artistry. We rotate focuses, right? So we'll have a month where we're really focused on conditioning and sort of building up our capacity, and maybe pole moves that aren't quite as complex in terms of their movements, but they may have a bigger strength component. And then the next month, we're going to focus on technical ability, so maybe pole moves that are more technically complex, and that either build on the strength that we built the previous month, or don't require as much strength. And then the third month, we're really going to be focusing on something where there's a little more space for stylization, a little bit more space for expression, and where you can really bring in a little bit more artistry, right? So past 3 months, we've been focusing on core. So we did straight up just core conditioning, focusing on, really lifting our legs, the thing that we do a lot in pole. And then the capacity month was straddle. So that was both, the flexibility to have a nice wide straddle because that makes things like inversions easier, really working on hamstring flexibility, groin flexibility, all that stuff. And then, also lifting your legs. And then this month we are working on spine waves, right? And articulation and expression with the spine, which, ties right into the core that we've been doing for the past 2 months. So that's sort of how all that works together. And then for the next 3 months, we'll have a different broad body part focus. So there is like there's like a 3-month rotation, there's a 1-month rotation, there's a weekly rotation, and then in class as well. So there's a lot of structure that goes into it, and a lot of things that I'm thinking about. And this is very broad strokes and sort of, these are the things that I'm always thinking about, but then, specific skills that we're working on, I'm going to really fine tune all this to that specific skill. And I pick skills based on what people tell me they're interested in, especially members, because you're going to be there for all the classes, you're going to get all the classes. So I want to do something that you are interested in. So, yeah. So that's sort of the general organizational principles that I'm working on. Something else that I've had some people ask me about is where I get exercises from, because I do, again, sort of drawing on principles of motor learning and variability of practice. It's not like we are always doing the same workout in conditioning. In fact, there's not that much overlap between the workouts. There is some, particularly in the sort of active flexibility if we're working on like hamstrings. I have like a sequence that I really like for hamstrings that incorporates, nerve glides, active flexibility. I've got some students with sciatica, so it's really, I'm very mindful of that. I've got some students who don't like to have weight on their knees, so I'm very mindful of that, right? So we don't usually train splits from a lunge, just as an example. For those reasons, and also for many pole dancers, the reason we train splits is we want a flat trade, and doing passive splits is just not going to be as fast of a way of building that flexibility as training the active flexibility that you want to get the flat splits in the air, right? So some things there is a little bit of repetition. A lot of things there just isn't, and I'm really picking things that are going to be very specifically relevant to what we are going to be doing during the month. And I draw on a lot of things actually. So I am not a Pilates instructor. I'm not a yoga instructor. I have taken a lot of Pilates and yoga. And I do occasionally draw on some of that movement discipline a little bit. Like, again, we don't do teasers, right? I'm not teaching, any specific flow, but there are some movements that I'm familiar with from those movement disciplines that will sometimes show up if they're relevant, usually modified in some way. Obviously I trained as a personal trainer, so I am drawing on sort of weightlifting, strength and conditioning. I always offer equipment-free options, as well as I do know a lot of my members have like free weights and TheraBands and yoga blocks and, other equipment at home. So I'll offer an option that uses that, because if you have it, why not use it? So a great example of that is a down dog push-up versus, a shoulder press. If you happen to have the weights and they are, available, then definitely something that you can do. But down dog push-up, you're going to get pretty much the same muscle activation, and you're going to be working on your inversions, which could be very helpful, particularly if you're someone whose, vestibular system isn't delighted to be upside down quite yet. But I do definitely draw on that sort of weightlifting, circuit training, strength and conditioning sort of side of things. I also do a little bit pull from calisthenics, not a whole bunch, because a lot of calisthenics does require, things like parallettes or, a pull-up bar, things like that. Some of the ground movements I do draw from. I will also say I think a lot of calisthenics conditioning is not particularly beginner friendly, and also not as useful if you have, when we put it this way, it's rarer for there to be variations offered for someone who has, for example, wider hips or carries most of their weight in their lower body, which is me and a lot of my students. So I do draw a little bit from calisthenics, but I wouldn't say it's like a major source. But there is some stuff, like particularly compression training, I find some of the calisthenic stuff can be helpful. I also draw a little bit on contortion and flexibility training techniques. I do teach flexibility. I'm gonna be very blunt. I don't teach contortion. I'm not gonna get you into extreme shapes. If that's what you're interested in, I'm just not your girl. I'm not a contortion coach. I'm, not an area of my expertise, but things like working external rotation in overhead motion, very important for us in pole, also something that's very important in contortion. So I will occasionally draw in contortion drills that are within, especially that are active, so you're not going to be able to move past your range of motion, basically. I also do pull in some therapeutic techniques as well. I was talking about this with my mother-in-law yesterday because she's a physical therapist, and we were talking about nerve glides. And I will say the research on nerve glides, very strong in therapeutic context. They're very helpful, but not as much. In fact, to my knowledge, no research has been done for them in terms of increasing flexibility. However, based on my experience and my experience with my students, it does seem to help, particularly the sciatic, the femoral, less often the sciatic, sometimes the ulnar nerve, sometimes ulnar, sometimes medial nerves seem to be points where the limiting factor of range of motion for folks is nerve and not muscle. So I incorporate things like that and some other therapeutic techniques from physical therapy. And again, I'm not a physical therapist. It's just there are movements that I have learned from that domain that are relevant to what we are doing in pole and that work as conditioning and are not contraindicated. So I will incorporate them. And also sometimes I just come up with exercises, right? Like a great example for this is we were working on one-legged climb a while ago. And one of the things that's very helpful in one-legged climb is finding more power in that lift with your body. If you are trying to muscle it up, it's going to be much harder. So really, you're not coming down into it, right? You're not bouncing through it. So that's really plyometric, but it is more power than strength-based. So I came up with an exercise to help with building power in the climb, which is that you start in a squat by the pole with your arms overhead. Your feet can be on the ground, you can be in the air, with your feet around the pole as if you were going to do a basic climb, and you powerfully come up from that squat, release your hands, clap in front of the pole, and come back down and catch yourself. And if you're not doing it powerfully, you're not going to have enough time at the top to find that clap, so it's giving you feedback on that, and especially if you're doing it on the ground, fairly easy to modify so that it feels safe for different people in different bodies. And that's just something I came up with because I knew that was the missing piece for a lot of folks in that particular movement. So I was like, what's a conditioning exercise that I can do that will help them to build that piece in a way that is lower risk, let's say. So that's sort of where I draw things from. And yeah, I'm changing stuff all the time. I'm doing experiments. I'm checking in with people about how things went and how things felt. I did do things I don't do anymore. One thing that I actually have been slowly reintroducing a little bit is a small amount of static stretches during warm-ups, because for a long time I just wasn't doing them at all. I was only doing mobility work. But there's been some research recently, I talked about it in my newsletter, if you get my newsletter, that suggests that the effects of static stretching that you get in terms of increased range of motion in the specific relevant thing that you're doing, as long as you don't need power in that specific relevant thing, the benefits may outweigh the downside, which is that it reduces power and strength momentarily. So acutely, I shouldn't say, not momentarily, for maybe up to an hour. Again, and that's what sort of current state of the research is, and as more research comes out, I may change my practice. That's the evidence. It's on that side. That's the evidence, and the evidence-based, right? Or, if I try something and all of my students feel like this feels bad and I don't like it, I'm not going to keep doing it, right? I'm bringing in evidence from a lot of different angles, and always trying to refine and change and make stuff better, basically. So, also, I'm going to leave you with some recommended reading because, I'm a nerd. I love doing my research, and if you've listened this far, probably you as well. A couple books that I think are really helpful, especially if you're not working with a coach, you're just doing sort of pole at home. So one, huge recommendation. Applied Anatomy of Aerial Arts by Emily Scherb, circus doc. We've had her on the podcast. She's really, really fabulous, really, really knowledgeable. It is more focused on like rope, silks, lyra, trapeze than it is on pole specifically, but a lot of the stuff is very, very relevant to pole. So highly, highly recommend, particularly for shoulders and understanding what's going on with the shoulders. It's the most commonly injured body part in pole, and I think really having an understanding of what's going on in the structure can help you build a sense of autonomy and self-efficacy that I think is really helpful and valuable. So definitely recommend that. Also, it's just a good read, right? I know Applied Anatomy can sound like kind of scary, but even if you're not an anatomist, I think you'll really enjoy it. Also, Strength and Conditioning for Pole by Naola Willoughby. If you're not familiar, her brand is PT The Pole. She is very knowledgeable and well qualified. I think actually currently going back from a master's. So very, brings a lot of knowledge, and particularly if you don't have an exercise background and you're not familiar with things like strength training and periodization and progressive overload, I think a really good introduction to that with a focus on pole and very sort of conversationally written. So that's a good resource. She has an anatomy book out as well. I should say I haven't read yet. It's on my to-read list. I got some stuff on it already on my to-read list. And then also, particularly if you are doing things at a more extreme motion, or if you have, a history of injury, I would definitely recommend Upside Down Injuries, Prehab and Rehab by Bendy Kate, who is a contortion teacher in addition to a pole dancer. I assume everyone knows Bendy Kate. She's really famous. I don't know, maybe not everyone does. I'm always surprised by, how sort of pole has changed over time. Another really good book, really, easy to read, and really talks about sort of common injuries and preventing them and then coming back from them if you do happen to be injured. So would definitely recommend those 3 books if you're looking to start a library. I think those 3 should definitely be in it. Also, so I've been talking a lot about my membership and I only open the door sometimes. Towards the end of this month, which is July 2024, I am going to be opening my doors for my membership, the Science of Slings membership. And if you're interested in training with me, I'd love to have you, and it is actually less expensive than taking 1 hour of drop-in classes a week with me, because I want you to get the benefit of all of this structure. I want you to get the benefit of the conditioning classes that work with the pole classes, that work with the freestyle classes, so that you get all of that together. But then even if you only take 1 hour class a week, you still end up saving money. So if you want to do everything, you definitely can. If you don't want to do everything, you don't have to. And it'll, as long as you're showing up a little bit regularly, you'll still be getting your money's worth. I'm trying to entice you to have a consistent movement practice. I'm dangling, I don't know, what would pole dancers like? Grip and fresh pole towels on a string to try and get you to show up regularly for your home practice, because I find that tend to be the biggest challenge with home practice is showing up and doing things regularly. So anyway, so that's a little bit about me, a little bit about how I'm thinking about organizing home pole training, and obviously this is for my members where all they have to do is show up. But if you're doing your own, I think those are really good things to keep in mind. Structuring, within your individual training session over a week, over a month, and over a longer span, 3 to 6 months. Some places where I have sort of built up my repertoire of exercises and movements and how I think about things, and then of course some recommended further reading. So. And I will put a link in the show notes. So if you're interested in joining me in my membership, I'd love to have you. It's a bunch of just lovely nerds who like to pole dance and talk about pole dance and think about pole dance. And I am so happy that other people care about the nerd shit that I care about. And yeah, if that's you, I'd love to have you in my membership. So waitlist link is down below. There'll be a little discount if you join from the waitlist. Wink. And otherwise, I will see you in the next episode. So I hope you have a very wonderful 2 weeks, and I will talk to you then. Thank you for listening. I hope you've learned something. If you want to do more research on your own, if we talked about specific studies, I always try to have the citations in the show notes so you can check them out for yourself. A great place to continue our learning. Speaking of continuing your learning, if you do want to work with me as a pole instructor, I teach online at my online studio, Slink Through Strength, and it would be great to have you come join us. I teach freestyle flow, I teach conditioning, I teach flexibility, and I teach pole in the nerdiest way possible. But we have a good time, and we'd love to have you join us if that sounds like fun for you. And if not, no worries. Either way, I'll see you in the next episode. Have a good one.